On September 10, 2025, the conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was shot and killed while speaking at Utah Valley University. It was a brutal, shocking moment of political violence. But to really understand what happened, you can't just look at that single tragic event. You have to zoom out. So in this breakdown, we're going to look at the event itself, the fallout, and what it tells us about the dangerous tension simmering just beneath the surface in America today. Let's get into it.
This quote from political science professor Robert Pape, it just hits you, right? A tinderbox of a country. It perfectly captures this feeling that all the dry fuel is just sitting there, waiting for a single spark. And lately, it feels like we've been seeing a lot of sparks.
So to really get a handle on what happened in Utah, we first need to look at the bigger picture, this growing pattern of political violence that's been on the rise all across the US. Look, this isn't just a list of random, unconnected events. It's a trend, and it's been accelerating. You go from the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise back in 2017 to the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband. And then, in 2024, the murder of a Minnesota lawmaker and the assassination attempt on President Trump. The violence just kept getting more frequent and more deadly. So Charlie Kirk's assassination, as shocking as it was, wasn't some bolt from the blue. It was the next horrible step in a very disturbing pattern.
And here's the thing. Security experts are saying this feels familiar. It's like we're seeing a return of the kind of political aggression that marked the 1960s and 70s. But what's different now? The fuel. The way our political conversations have become so incredibly divided, so toxic, and then amplified a million times over by social media, is pushing some people over the edge. All right, so let's zoom back in. Let's go to that day at Utah Valley University and see exactly how this national tension exploded into tragedy. So picture the scene. It's September 10th, 2025. This is the very first stop on Charlie Kirk's national campus tour. He's outside under a big tent, talking to a crowd of around 3,000 people. You know, a pretty standard setup for one of his events, meant to be an open forum for students. And the accounts from people who were there, man, they paint a terrifying picture. Witnesses mentioned how light the security seemed, which was weird, and then just a very loud pop. One person who was right near the stage described seeing Kirk's body shake and the blood. Another just remembers the raw fear in everyone's eyes. Pure chaos. And what came next was just a stampede. People were screaming, running, diving for any cover they could find. A single shot from a building 140 yards away turned a campus debate into a scene of absolute terror in a split second. And then you have this detail, a moment of just unbelievable, sickening irony. An eyewitness confirmed that at the very instant that shot was fired, someone in the crowd had just asked Charlie Kirk a question about gun violence.
Okay, so in the aftermath of the assassination, 3 huge conversations just erupted, and we need to look at all of them. The massive security failures, the crazy media reaction, and the deeply divided political fallout.
This slide just lays it out in black and white. On one hand, you have what people there actually saw. Virtually no security, no one checking bags, fewer cops than you'd see at a college game. But on the other hand, you have what security experts say is absolutely essential for someone like Kirk. Threat assessments, intelligence-driven planning, coordination. The gap between what should have happened and what actually did is just staggering. You know, for more than 100 years, we had this system. Traditional news outlets, guided by ethical codes like this one, acted as gatekeepers. They made very careful, deliberate decisions about what to show, especially when it came to graphic images. They saw it as their duty to report the news with a certain level of sensitivity. Well, that old model is completely shattered. As this quote from The Independent points out, the reality now is totally different. The most graphic, explicit video of the assassination was on platforms like X and Instagram almost instantly, and because of things like autoplay and algorithmic feeds, millions of people didn't choose to watch it, it was just there. The gatekeepers were gone.
And the political reaction? It was completely fragmented. You can see the split right here. President Trump immediately pointed the finger at the radical left, saying their words created terrorism. Then you add others, like Speaker Mike Johnson, trying to cool things down, saying we shouldn't see each other as enemies. And then you have people like Gabby Giffords, who knows this horror firsthand, pleading for us to reject violence. It wasn't one unified voice of grief. It was a nation immediately arguing about who was to blame.
This all leads us to a really disturbing idea, and it's actually something Kirk himself had warned about. It's the rise of what some researchers are calling an assassination culture.
So what does that actually mean?
Well, according to extremism researchers, it's when the idea of violence against public figures stops being shocking. It becomes normalized, almost acceptable. And how does that happen? Through online memes, dark humor, and rhetoric that paints these attacks as somehow justified, maybe even heroic.
Here's a real-world example. This is Luigi Mangione. He was accused of murdering a healthcare CEO. In some corners of the internet, he wasn't treated like an alleged killer. He was turned into a meme, a kind of folk hero. And researchers say that's how you build what they call permission structures for violence. It starts as a joke, but it slowly makes the unthinkable seem thinkable.
And this is the most chilling part. This abstract online idea became horribly real in Utah. An eyewitness, Adam Bartholomew, was near some counter-protesters when the shot was fired. And he says some of the people around him were celebrating. They were saying things like, fingers crossed. This wasn't some anonymous troll online. This was happening out loud at the scene of a murder.
So after all of this, the big question is, where do we go from here? Because the assassination of Charlie Kirk isn't just a tragedy in our rearview mirror, it's a massive warning sign for what's ahead. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This is straight from the Department of Homeland Security's 2025 Threat Assessment. Their official analysis is crystal clear. The terrorism threat here in the US is going to stay high, mostly driven by lone actors and small groups who are radicalized by all kinds of different ideas.
And the DHS report points to one specific flashpoint, the election cycle. They call it an attractive target for threat actors. They're warning that domestic violent extremists are likely to see everything from polling places to candidates as fair game for attacks, all with the goal of creating fear and blowing up the democratic process itself.
Which brings us back to the fundamental question. When the rhetoric gets so hot that it turns into actual bullets, how does a country step back from the brink? How do you cool down a tinderbox that's already on fire? That's the challenge that this tragedy has put right in front of all of us.